Greetings. This is a narrated slideshow based on the one that was presented on Tuesday, April 24th at St. Anthony Park Lutheran Church. We're getting ready for our trip, which starts June 12th. Most of us are leaving June 12th, but we'll start in Berlin on June 13th, and then, of course, come back on Saturday, June 23rd. Our planned itinerary, many of you know it already from the brochure, but this slideshow contains some information regarding what we're going to see and some other tips as well. Keep in mind that as we go, there's sort of three levels of German history that I like to point out. This is called the Reformation Heritage Tour. Of course, when you're in Germany, you'll be seeing all kinds of sites related to all kinds of moments in history, not just the Reformation. I like to point out that Germany kind of highlights its religious history, that's Reformation, its darker history, that of the Third Reich, and its age of empire, let's say, leading up to the Third Reich, and then the time of reunification, which began with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of 1989. So these are all things to watch for. These are things we'll learn about and talk about as we go through our tour. Here's a map of the eastern part of Germany where we'll be spending a lot of time, and just want to highlight the trip overall so you can kind of get an idea that of what we'll be seeing, the geography we'll be covering. We'll be landing in Berlin, of course, then 3 nights in Berlin, then on to Wittenberg, where we'll be spending 3 more nights. One of the days we'll be taking a day trip with the train to Erfurt, and then on our way to Dresden, we'll be stopping in Leipzig, and then we'll spend 2 nights in Dresden, and a little bit of a longer trek, stopping in Bamberg, a great medieval town, and then concluding in the city of Nuremberg. That's the trip, and then of course we fly home from there. Just a little bit of a history lesson regarding the old East and West. Here's the border of the East-West divide back during the Cold War time. And of course, we call the stuff to the left West Germany, and the stuff, or the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, if you're rehearsing your German, and the eastern part was called the Demokratische Deutsche Republik, or the German Democratic Republic, or GDR. And then Berlin, where we'll be starting our tour, was divided in half as well. And our hotel is in the old West Berlin, but we'll be spending a lot of time in East Berlin now. Of course, now it's all reunited. But back in the day, you used to have to, there was one road that kind of cut through East Germany, and behind the Iron Curtain Germany, barbed wires on both sides, and came out in West Berlin. So West Berlin was sort of an island of capitalism, split by the French and the British and the Americans after World War II, and East Berlin was the place where all the stuff was happening to lead to the fall of the wall in 1989. So, of course, to reunification, it's all one big happy country. Of course, it's not completely happy. There's all kinds of issues that are still felt, especially in the East, as a result of the reunification. So we'll be talking and learning about some of that. We'll be landing in Berlin. Those of you who are flying in on the day the tour starts, on Wednesday, June 13th. We will not be landing at the Berlin-Brandenburg airport. Unfortunately, this is still not open. It was supposed to open in 2009, but we'll be landing in the old Tegel airport, the old airport of the former West Berlin. Here's a Google overview of the center of Berlin. And our hotel is right down here, ideally located in the center, close to the Tiergarten Park, which is, Berlin's Central Park. They've got a number of big parks, but this is the Central Park. And so you can see we're kind of ideally located to the main sites of Berlin in this central area. Here's an overview with a real camera. This is the Sony Center right here, this area right here. And if our map continued, our hotel would be just to the left of that arrow. So nice places to walk. This right here is the Holocaust Memorial, or the Memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. You'll see a photo of that in a sec. And then the Brandenburg Gate is here, and train station here. All kinds of great sites that we'll talk about in just a moment. Our hotel is the Maritime Hotel Berlin, one of two in Berlin, and like I said, ideally located for all kinds of opportunities to sightsee, whether by public transportation or by our deluxe bus or by foot. So the Brandenburg Gate is something we'll see on our first day. We'll be getting in the morning, so after everyone's settled in the hotel, we'll probably take a shorter tour to get to know the city a little bit. And within walking distance of the hotel are these two famous sites, the Brandenburg Gate and the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. Say more about those later. The next day, Thursday, will be a full travel day. We'll be on our bus touring the highlights of the city, becoming more familiar with the city. This is the Berliner Dom, or cathedral, which is really the only cathedral that was built in Europe conceived as a Protestant cathedral, not a Roman Catholic cathedral. And we'll try and get in there for a noontime worship service, and it really is a sight to behold. I won't spoil it, but there's lots of surprises inside. We'll be close to Checkpoint Charlie, and we'll stop there and take photos. The gate, of course, is still there, but now it's a place not for people to travel from east to west, from this side of the Iron Curtain to the other side, but to take pictures. You pay a couple euro, and there's a soldier there. You can choose your soldier, Russian or American, and it's a big tourist site now. It doesn't look like this at all anymore. This is a section of the Berlin Wall that is still up, and there's an outdoor display exhibit museum there, and it's really well done history of the Berlin Wall and everything that it stood for during the Cold War. On Friday, then we'll have some time to explore Berlin, and there will be all kinds of recommendations, and we'll get the maps out, and I will be leading some walking tours to some of the highlights. But one of the highlights to keep in mind is the Reichstag, or the German Parliament building, which was rebuilt after World War II, and you can see it was rebuilt with a clear dome. And this is a dome you can tour. So we'll send an email with information to highlight how to tour it. It's easier to get tickets in smaller bundles, and you reserve those tickets online. They're free. Those tickets, you can sign up for them now. So we'll get that website for you so you can reserve some tickets if you want to see this. You can see maybe there's some people in here. That's because you can walk up this spiral ramp that'll take you close to the top, and you get some great views up here. Also nearby in the old East Berlin is the Pergamon Museum. This is a Pergamon altar, which is taken from Pergamon, Greece, and reconstructed inside this museum. This museum was in old East Germany, or East Berlin, and now, of course, it's much more accessible to folks in the West. The highlight of the Pergamon Museum is the Ishtar Gate, a gate that was taken and refurbished from ancient Babylon. All kinds of other treasures. If museums are your thing, Friday's the time to see the museum. This is, again, not far from our hotel. This is a memorial to World War II and the damage and destruction and all the dead. They left this bombed out church as is rather than rebuild it, and then built a new church next to it. So here's a new steeple of the church, and here's the new worship space. And if it's open, which it should be, we'll get a chance to go in there. There's usually always something happening in there, and it's a good way to spend an hour or so visiting this great memorial. Again, on this free day, maybe you're interested in exploring the western part of the city, which is a little bit more bucolic. Open spaces, open parks, a big lake called the Wannsee. This is a beer garden that overlooks the Wannsee, and way across the lake somewhere here is a museum uh, to the Wannsee Conference, which we'll talk about what happened at the Wannsee Conference. Then finally Saturday, we're going to leave Berlin after spending some good time there, I think, and we will not be taking this VW back in our coach liner, of course, as we head off to Wittenberg and land in the great city of Martin Luther. I say great city in quotation marks, perhaps, really is a small, well-preserved medieval village, at least the old town. And of course, we'll be spending some time here as well as we dig into our Lutheran heritage. This is actually an older picture of the market square of Wittenberg. These two statues now have been molded into one statue, I believe. Or is this the newer one? I can't remember. So this square, oh, and I'll say a word about something that you may have caught in that previous slide. But this is on the west side of town. This is the Castle Church, where Luther preached and held ceremonies, academic ceremonies, and where he's buried today. So you see the outline of the Wittenberg door, where Luther is said to have nailed the 95 Theses. Of course, this door looks quite different than it did 500 years ago. You see here on the door are the 95 Theses in Latin etched in bronze. But you can still take your pictures there. On the east side of town is the old Augustinian monastery, which stopped functioning as an Augustinian monastery in 1525 and became the home of Martin Luther and his bride, Katharina von Bora. Today, the Luther House is a wonderful museum, and we'll be we'll have a tour through there and get to see some great art and artifacts and get a good understanding of Luther and his wife and their family and how they lived after this monk and this nun got married. Here's an overview of the center of the city, and we saw this in an earlier slide. This is the city church, or the St. Mary Church. This is still a functioning Protestant parish, and it is the church where Luther preached regularly for the town folk, along with other preachers. But when Luther had preaching duties, it would not have been unusual for him to preach every day of the week in this church. Our hotel, or our lodgings, called Kolleg Wittenberg, is just where this arrow is pointing to a roof. Under that roof is our Kolleg. So we're nice and centrally located. There's a shopping mall that kind of stretches through this space now. This is an older photo. This looks different now. And there's groceries and stores and snacks and restaurants here and everywhere else. So we'll get to know Wittenberg well, and we'll be living right in the middle of it in a lodging that's intended for study groups and visiting professors and such, called Kolleg Wittenberg. The the St. Mary's Church unique artifact called the Wittenberg altarpiece, or St. Mary's altarpiece, and it was painted in the 50s by an artist named Lucas Cranach, and everything that the Reformation stood for is coded in the four panels of this altarpiece, and so we'll be able to sit in front of it, and we'll share some details about it and some info, and of course take some pictures. But this is one of my favorite things about Wittenberg, is this fantastic piece of art which has been refurbished and refreshed, and the colors are just popping these days. So we'll enjoy spending some time looking at that. When we explore Wittenberg, you'll see it's pretty easy to navigate. This is an old image of the town from the 1600s. We're looking sort of north to south, and this is the south side of town, and here's the Elbe River. Here's the different orientation. Here's south right now. The river's down here, just off of the bottom of this picture. And the town here is kind of etched by this green space, the old town. And if this is the Luther house here on the right, and the old castle church here on the left, and the St. Mary's Church here in the middle. It's really not that much distance to cover as we get to know this town and walk its streets. You can do it. It's about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes from one side to the other. And our hotel is right here, the Coleg Wittenberg. On the free day, there might be some museums you want to see. One of them is the Luther's right-hand man, Philip Melanchthon. We'll hear how he was instrumental in the Reformation, and you can visit the place where he lived and taught and died. His name is Philip Melanchthon. Some others haven't. Here's one of the images of Master Philip. This image was painted by Lucas Cranach, who painted that altarpiece. There's a museum for Cranach, and there's a self-portrait of Cranach, and there's a you can see with Cranach works of arts. Really one of the masters of the North German Renaissance, late medieval Renaissance. Lucas Cranach, and he happened to be Martin Luther's neighbor. One of my favorite things to see is still going to be up. That's called the Assisi panorama. This artist named Assisi, he's got a number of these around Europe, but this one is a 360-degree, 50-foot tall indoor panorama or museum of what Wittenberg might have looked like in 1517. And sometimes there's daytime, sometimes it's nighttime. And this image here is of the castle church. And you just kind of stand on the center platform and get to feel and hear the sounds of Wittenberg in the 1517s, including the sounds of the running creek / sewer that went through the middle of town. If there's energy for it, we'll show you, or perhaps I'll even lead a group to nearby Torgau. It's a 1 hour slow train ride away, and we're spending an hour or two, maybe part of an afternoon, walking around Torgau. Torgau's famous because it had a castle that was owned by Prince Frederick, one of many that Luther's Prince Frederick owned in Saxony. But it's even more famous because in the cathedral, Luther's wife, Katharina von Bora, is buried, and this is the tombstone for Katharina von Bora, Luther's wife. On Monday, there'll be a day excursion. It's paid for, but if you don't want to go, if you want to rest up, you can stay behind in Wittenberg, but we'll be climbing on the fast train, the German bullet train, to the city of Erfurt. And Erfurt is a wonderful old medieval city that's been off the beaten tourist paths, mainly because this was a part of the old East Germany. But it's really an impressive city with an incredibly well-preserved old medieval center. This is the market square with the St. Peter's Church anchoring one end of it. This is just one example of some of the medieval architecture that's at the heart of the town, with the Gera river running through it. And of course, this is where Luther started his career as a monk before moving to Wittenberg. And the old Augustinian monastery has been really well preserved and rebuilt. And this may or may not have been the cell, one of the cells where Luther lived when he lived in the Augustinian monastery in Erfurt. Back to Wittenberg then at the end of Monday for one more overnight. And then the next day we'll head off to Dresden, to the south and east of Wittenberg. On the way, we'll stop at Leipzig, which was somewhat famous and instrumental in the progress of the Reformation. That information will be shared, but of particular note in Leipzig are the events that were centered here at the Nikolai Kirche, or the St. Nicholas Church, in the heart of the city. Prayer meetings that started on Monday nights in 1983 grew and grew and grew in the year 1989, so that that started with 15, 20 people in 1983, grew to fill the church in 1989, and so much so that in 1989, the church, of course, couldn't hold the crowds. And Leipzig was one of the centers of protest that led to the collapse of the Berlin Wall in that dramatic year, 1989. Also important in Leipzig, of course, is Johann Sebastian Bach, who spent the greatest part of his career creating and performing church music in the St. Thomas Kirche. So we'll visit the St. Thomas Kirche. Likely we'll hear someone playing the Bach organ there, and we'll get to take pictures with Bach. After our stopover in Leipzig, it'll be a longer stopover. We'll head off to Dresden, be there by dinner time. Dresden is a wonderful old city on the Elbe River, just like Wittenberg. Completely destroyed in World War II, firebombed by the Allies. They estimate 250 to 350,000 people in Dresden were killed by the incendiary bombing. But you can hardly tell that Dresden was destroyed. It has been rebuilt over the years, especially since the reunification. The most impressive rebuilding is the St. Mary's Church, and so we'll spend some time there at this church, learning about its significance, and including what it memorialized. It's a wonderful city along the river with plenty of great walking to do, and plenty of great old buildings. And here's the St. Mary's Church down here. This is what the church looked like before World War II. And this is what it looked like after it was bombed in March of 1945. The Luther statue was put back on top. Luther was actually knocked off his statue in the bombing and then put back on the pedestal, as it were. So you can walk to the top of this church and enjoy the view from up there. But what's most impressive is the building itself. From Dresden, we'll head off to our last stop, our last destination, the city of Nuremberg. Again, another great old medieval city with an old medieval center. But on the way, we'll stop at Bamberg, yet another wonderful city, great place to walk and stop for lunch and check out the old medieval center. So there's a number of things to see in Nuremberg, all the medieval-y stuff, but the Dürer house, I want to spend some time in. Albrecht Dürer was a big supporter of the Reformation, and his artwork is a testament to that. No doubt you'll be familiar with some of the images that we'll encounter in the museum. Some other highlights are the Henkersteg. This is what it looks like today. Just some of the features of the old medieval. This is an option for the afternoon. Many of you may want to shop and pack. There's lots of good shopping to do in Nuremberg. Our hotel will be right by the central shopping area. But if you want to do something different, you may consider checking out the World War II Documentation Center on the grounds of the old rally grounds. The Nuremberg rallies. They've made a wonderful museum, especially owning up to the function of propaganda and how it helps support the rise of the Reich and to perpetuate the Third Reich after Hitler took power. Then we'll have our last dinner on Friday night, and Saturday we'll head and make our way back to the Twin Cities. So that's our trip. That's, again, a quick overview with some quick information. Of course, you'll be getting a lot more teaching and learning on the trip. We look forward to it. And any questions, contact myself, Pastor Jill, or Pastor Glenn. See you soon.